Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominic and Brian.
There are times where I get really fired up to do a podcast on a particular topic, like this one on anger. But beforehand, I like to present the concept to Brian as something to discuss. And on this particular occasion, I remember his face going kind of blank. And in his best attempt to be collaborative, he said, "Yeah, why do we want to do an entire hour-long episode on this?" And I could totally empathize with his reaction because for the first 35 years of my life, and I'm 40 now, I would have had the same reaction as Brian. I didn't believe that I had an angry bone in my body, that anger was not something I really dealt with on a regular basis. I was taught at a very early age that anger wasn't something that was acceptable, that it was a weakness, an unharnessed emotion in lesser human beings who couldn't control their emotions. But over the last 5 years, my view towards anger has radically shifted, and I've done a deep amount of work through men's work, through coaching, through therapy on myself and with my clients. And the way that that has shown up and manifested in my life, the benefits. I have never been more powerful. I've never spoken up more for what I believed in. I have more energy than I've ever had before. The sexual polarity I can create in relationships with women who know that I can channel and connect to my anger in a healthy way as a form of expression creates a magnetizing sexual chemistry with women. I'm looked at as a leader in difficult situations and in times where there are injustices or where a difficult topic needs to be addressed because my anger is a guidepost for how to stand up for what's right. And it's a quick way to understand what falls outside the boundaries. And so this conversation is for a man that falls into one of three categories. Number one, this is the category in which Brian reacted, which is, I'm not angry. Well, why does this conversation matter for me? The man who says that he's not angry, the man who believes he does not have anger is suppressing more anger than you could possibly imagine. Suppressing it, denying it, ignoring it. And we all know what happens when a man ignores, suppresses, denies his anger. In some cases, that detonates internally and he has a negative self-talk. Over time, he could become exhausted. He doesn't play big enough games. But in the worst of scenarios, and these aren't our listeners, but in the worst of scenarios, we see men who are shooting up nightclubs and schools because of this anger that has been suppressed and misguided. The second category of man is the man who believes that anger is a weakness and anger should be avoided at all costs. Once you learn how to channel your anger, there's creativity and power and life force that can be tapped into as a result of that. And category number three, if you've ever felt ashamed about your anger because you've said something or done something that you regret, then this is a conversation for you to be able to take back control of your anger source so that it is a source of power, not a source of shame in the future.
All right, Dominic, you said for today's podcast, you wanted to talk about anger.
Yes. You gave me a side eye when I said that.
Yeah, I said, how are we going to spend 45 minutes talking about one singular emotion, and not any emotion, but probably the emotion that I have mostly avoided my life.
Yeah.
I used to get feedback from supervisors at work, from bosses at work that would say, Brian, we really love how chill you are, but we just wish sometimes maybe you'd give it a little more energy, a little more oomph. I'm like, yeah, they're like, you never really seem to be angry. I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
And you're welcome.
What do you think that they were trying to tell you when they said that?
They would like to see me get more upset when things don't go well. I think.
And what does that mean? What would that mean to them if they saw that?
They would see me react.
Yeah, but what's important about you reacting?
They know that I'm feeling something. They know that something's going to change.
Yeah, they know that you care, that you give a shit, right? That what you're doing matters. And so some form of righteous anger would have given them a signal that like you're invested, that you care.
Right. That's exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, what are we talking about? Let's get into this freaking emotion here.
Anger can be confusing. And this conversation is really for a guy who falls into one of these three categories. The guy who says, I'm not angry. Why does this conversation even matter? That would have been me for the majority of my life. The man who also says, anger is a weakness, right? It's an unhinged emotion. If you're angry, that means that you can't command your emotions and your emotions are commanding you. So it is a weakness. And the third one is the guy who says, I'm ashamed. I am angry. I've demonstrated before. I've blown my top. I've said things I didn't want to say. I regret my actions. I've punched holes in the wall. I've said things that I can't take back. And I'm ashamed of that. Anger doesn't have a place in my life. This is a conversation for those three types of men. We often talk about the shadow side of anger. Like when we refer to anger, we refer to the dark sides of it. The destruction, the rage, it shows up in physical forms like murder and rape.
That's exactly what I think of. When you thought of anger, I'm like, oh, this is going to be a really fun topic. Let's talk about all these holes in the walls and everything else that comes along with the anger as we classically define it.
Breaking shit, whether it's like physical shit or relationship shit.
And scared and being scared from it too.
No doubt. There's a time and a place to have that conversation, but we want to talk to the guys that I just mentioned because over the course of a lifetime, denying anger, wronging anger, making it just this binary black or white thing, it actually suppresses a very important emotion that can give us very distinct clues about how we operate, about what we hold important, about channeling that killer energy that your bosses at work were talking about, channeling that killer energy that women want to see from you that make them feel safe, but also fucking alive and polarized and magnetized with you. That's the conversation that we want to have today. And most guys who fall into those categories I mentioned before don't know how to get at their anger and are afraid to actually go to that place. I know that I was one of them because at a very early age when I was demonstrating anger, it was beaten back into me. I think a great place to start, Brian, is to read 7 quotes that I picked up from some of the greatest writers and philosophers of all time that can go to show how contradictory anger can be perceived by even the greatest of thinkers. And as I read these to you, just feel free to jump in with any thoughts, feelings, and reactions that you have. Let's start with a guy that you may have heard of before. His name is Mark Twain.
Love Mark Twain. Big fan.
Mark Twain. Anger is an acid that can do more harm to the vessel in which it is stored than to anything on which it is poured. Next one, Mitch Albom. If you've ever heard of him, he wrote the book, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. He's also a prolific sports writer. Learn this from me. Holding anger is a poison. It eats you from the inside. We think that hating is a weapon that attacks the person who harmed us, but hatred is a curved blade. And the harm we do to ourselves.
So far, I'm very confused because these 2 quotes tell us to get the anger out.
Yeah, exactly. The first 2 quotes from Mitch and Mark have told us that if we hold anger, the destructive, corrosive effect that it has on us. Now, this is important because most guys that we're talking to don't even know that they're holding on to the anger. So if you're holding on to anger unconsciously, it is corroding you from the inside.
I feel like a most guy right now.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Maya Angelou, amazing writer. I'm reading one of her books right now. She says, bitterness is like cancer. It eats upon the host, but anger is like fire. It burns all clean. What do you think she means when she says that?
Burns all clean. I guess to have life, we have to have death. And like, what's better than fire to do that?
Yeah.
So
it's like an antiseptic. It's like a cleansing agent to burn away the shit that is irrelevant or is not serving. So she's starting to position, she's like, listen, bitterness is like a cancer. Bitterness is what Mark Twain and Mitch Albom describe. And what she's saying is like anger can be like fire, it can cleanse. Here's another one that could be seemingly contradictory. Lao Tzu, the famed philosopher, the best fighter is never angry. The best fighter is never angry. And what he's referring to is the warrior archetype right? The warrior archetype, the warrior is the one who stands up for injustices. The warrior is the one that defends the kingdom. And the warrior, one of the biggest attributes of the warrior is that he is dispassionate in the carrying out of his duties. So he is not carrying a self-serving rage or anger that's only satisfying the ego. He is standing for something bigger.
This is the first quote that you mentioned that resonates with me, that makes sense. I've thought about times where I'm in a fight, not necessarily a physical fight, but maybe. But I've been in a fight and I don't think straight when I'm angry.
Yeah.
The quote, seeing red.
Yes.
And so this one, that's what it sounds like to me, is if I'm angry, even playing sports, if I'm angry playing sports, I used to play baseball. I don't hit very well when I'm angry.
Okay. What you're hitting on here is really important. We want to distinguish, and this is just our language. It's not universal language. We want to distinguish between anger and rage. Anger and rage. So the way that I distinguish anger and rage is if we have anger and we can harness it, then we control it, then we wield it. Rage is the other way around. That's where you're seeing red and you are completely controlled by your emotions and you're dragged around like wild horses. If you bring rage to the baseball field, you're swinging at pitches before the pitcher even throws it. If you're bringing rage to the football field, you're aggressive and you're going to be hitting somebody, but most times someone who's like much more channeled and harnessed in their emotion will run right by you.
So you mentioned in the intro of this podcast, there's a light side and a dark side. I think you even called it a shadow side of anger.
Yeah.
Is that rage or is that something different?
Yeah. Rage is that shadow side where you're being controlled by your emotion and it's destructive. It's chaotic. It's not harnessed for some greater end or mean. Anger can be a natural reaction to something important. It could signal that a boundary has been crossed. It could signal that there's an injustice. You should be angry at the mass school shootings that are happening, right? When someone goes and obliterates a church, takes out people that are innocent, we should be angry at that. If my sister who has special needs, if someone's picking on her and making fun of her, I should be fucking angry at that, but I shouldn't allow my emotions to control me in that moment and then throw a fist at the person, just like a knee-jerk reaction, because there are consequences to that. It's, can I step outside of that emotional reaction, feel the anger, and really like hone in on why I'm feeling angry? My sister, beautiful human being, provides love and lightness to everyone around her, and she can't defend herself in those situations, wouldn't know how. So I, in my righteous anger, can hold a boundary and be very stern for the person who makes fun of her and say, yo, that's not cool. Here's why. Here's what's up. Here's what's not acceptable. And then allow that person the opportunity to either fucking, say, whoa, I'm sorry. Or if they don't accept it, then we'll turn the other way. But I'm not going to throw a fist and create a situation where I could possibly get arrested for someone who I don't give a shit about.
Okay. You can't see me on the podcast, but my gears are turning on this because I'm thinking, can you never throw a fist then? Is that the deal? Or can you throw a fist in a controlled manner?
Fair. So that is a personal decision. For me, it would take a hell of a lot for me to want to throw a fist at somebody. And I do believe there is a line with which if it were to be crossed, I would throw a fist if the situation required. But in a lot of the thinking I've done about my own anger, that line is pretty far out. It's pretty far out. But there is a place where I would feel that justified. I just, that scenario that I just gave doesn't cross that line for me.
Okay.
Let me read you 3 more. Toni Morrison, the prolific African-American writer who just passed away 48 hours ago, she has a very strong stance on anger as an emotion. Anger, it's a paralyzing emotion. You can't get anything done. People sort of think it's an interesting, passionate, and igniting feeling. I don't think any of that. It's helpless. It's absence of control. And I need all of my skills, all of the control, all of my powers. And anger doesn't provide any of that. I have no use for it whatsoever. I would say, of anything that we've heard so far, that mostly describes the sentiment that you occupy right now.
Yeah. If I feel that emotion that shall not be named pop up, it's like, nope, go away. There's something else here. Now, Dominic, that brings up something else. During our men's group that meets on Monday nights, anger, the emotion of anger will come up often.
Yeah.
And I know something that we encourage each member to do is to go underneath, like what's below that anger. Like, is anger some sort of secondary emotion? Like, what is actually driving that anger?
Right.
And so I'm curious here, like what your thoughts are on that. Like, is that something how we deal with it, or is anger kind of this other animal?
We've seen it in our men's groups where anger is the primary emotion. It's, a boundary's been crossed and boom, anger. But we've also seen it be a secondary emotion, like you were saying, where the primary emotion is really sadness or something else, right? Like, so when we've had men in our men's group really tap into their anger, and we can talk about more specific ways of doing that. But let's say, for example, we have this big cushion that we call, it's not a cushion, it's, what would we call this thing?
It's like one of those kids' gymnastics toys things.
Yeah. That's like big and cushiony. It kind of comes up to your waist, and it is the perfect size for beating the shit out of something in a way that it's harnessed and channeled, right? There's no destruction to the room that we're in. And so guys will like squeeze this thing, guys will put on the ground and just beat the shit out of it until they're exhausted. And usually once that anger is actually released from the body through that form of aggression, in some cases we see guys laughing or we'll see guys crying because they fully felt that emotion and released it. And what's there in some cases, like I mentioned, would be sadness, like sadness of being rejected, sadness of feeling overwhelmed and not up to the task of the life that they've created. Like too much work is overwhelming. So yes, we've seen it both ways.
Yeah. Okay.
So Toni Morrison, who basically just dismissed anger as like, this is useless in her life. And I would say the way that she characterized anger is really the way that I would characterize rage, right? That helpless feeling where we see red, punch holes in the walls, say things that we don't mean.
It's such an important distinction. I'm glad we're bringing this up because that's how I always looked at anger, period. There was no other side to anger. It was always that unhinged, seeing red, reactive state. And that wasn't okay.
That's why it's important for you and I to have these nuanced conversations, like to really be able to delineate. Because when we bucket all of what anger is into this undesirable category, then anytime anger comes up inside of us, we're like, well, fuck, I can't be that way because it's wrong, because it's bad, because I could become unhinged. And therefore, as soon as that anger thing kicks up, you deny it, you wrong it, you suppress it. And here's one thing I learned from going to the Mankind Project. The Mankind Project is the very first men's retreat I ever went to, where for me, the key takeaway was my relationship with anger. And this was about 5 years ago or so. They're like, listen, anger is a natural human emotion. You should allow it. You should feel it. It's what you do with the anger that matters, right? If anger tips over into rage, they were the one who taught me about like anger versus rage. If it tips over into rage and you become this tornado and cyclone where your emotions are controlling you, you're being dragged around by wild horses. That is an undesirable state because you could destroy. This anger feeling is a natural human emotion, and it could be an extraordinary source of motivation, of creativity, of inspiration if you know how to channel it, of being able to establish your own boundaries, to be able to protect others. And they said that anger, no matter whether you're denying it or suppressing it, anger always has a way of coming out. And anger comes out in one of 3 ways. Number 1, it comes out directly at the source of the anger that catalyzed this. So that's oftentimes either, if it comes out at the source, if it's unhinged, you can create destruction, right? Like you could get angry, you could say things that you haven't been able to take back. In horrible cases, we see abuse, we see violence. If it's harnessed and it comes out directly at that source, then you can actually have a constructive conversation. It could be passionate, but like there could become an understanding, a potential for understanding there. The second way is if it comes out sideways, right? It's like, oh, I'm not really that angry, but the sideways forms that it takes is passive aggressiveness, sarcasm, cynicism. You know these people who walk around all day long and like make sarcastic remarks or cynical remarks. That is the easiest tuning instrument to figure out if someone's angry. So someone who is relentlessly sarcastic or passive aggressive, it's just anger seeping out a little bit at a time. The last way that it comes out is when it's turned inwards. Anger is turned inwards. And the way that it's turned inwards on you, you can start to recognize if you have that response to it is the voice in your head. I'm not good enough. Or how did you fuck that up? Or how could you have said that? How could you have done that? You're not enough.
That's where my anger is going. Now I see. Yeah, that voice in my head is a real dick.
Yeah.
It's really, really angry. Okay, this makes more sense. I was like, I feel like my anger when I feel it direct at the source, that didn't resonate with me all that much. Maybe when I was a little bit younger. The sideways, like, I think I'm not too cynical. I'm not too sarcastic. Okay, so where's it going?
Yeah.
Inward makes a lot of sense. And I'll tell you the byproduct of that is it feels weak. When it's not spoken, I'm reflecting here, Dominic, as you're talking, and I'm thinking about a lot of either relationships or decisions that were or were not made that I held on to for too long because that anger wasn't brought up. It wasn't allowed or it just turned inward.
Is there a recurring theme that you've had over the course of time about how you've turned that inward?
Sure. Yeah, really easy. Something pops up. It makes me angry. I suppress it. And then I think about how to deal with it in a way that will be productive, but non-confrontational. Things take longer to get resolved because I'm not allowing that up. And internally, it's really frustrating because sometimes I just want to be like, fuck! Like, that's enough!
Yeah.
Oftentimes that just sits.
It sits and you're holding on to it. So see that, like, that anger is kind of like this stuck emotion in your body, and it can be exhausting because you could ruminate on it. And I would say the process that you just described about, okay, I have this reaction. I don't do this knee-jerk thing. I do think about it before I speak, and I want to bring it in this non-confrontational way. There are elements of that are really positive. But what I would say is what I'm feeling from you is as you're processing through it, and before you bring it out to confront the other person or confront the situation, something gets lost in that process where you dilute your actual feeling because you've made this anger thing wrong, where you're like, I can't fully express my anger because I may say something I regret, or I may hurt the other person, or I may agitate the other person and then have to deal with the effects of what I just did.
All of that. And it comes across as very politically correct. It comes across as very polished.
Yes.
And I've seen that be successful in my career and relationships, but there's something missing. There's some sort of spark, the same thing that my bosses used to see.
Exactly, man. And it's so like you're suppressing that killer instinct. And you do that enough times and people can start to walk on you. They can trample your boundaries. They can see how far they can get with you. There's sometimes an unconscious loss of respect for you because they're like, you know what? I could push Brian around a little bit and he's not gonna fight back. Almost any one of us can think about a person. You're like, I'm not gonna fuck with them, man. They know their boundary and they will confront you in that moment, and not in a way that's like a tirade, not like a rage going off the hook, but someone who's just like, you can't fuck with them. And there's a part of that. There's a big part of that you're like, I respect that person. I want that person in my foxhole, right? I want that person on my team. That's the kind of anger that we're talking about, is being able to effectively communicate it. And here's what Mankind Project taught me. They taught me how to take the third category, which is where I was, which is where you are, which is turning the anger inward and channeling that to number one, which is directing it at the source.
Ooh, are you going to teach me how to do this now? This is great.
Yeah, dude. Let me share this story with you. So, growing up, my parents are like extraordinary people. You know how much love and affection I have for them. And in my household, anger and upset were really uncomfortable emotions. So, like, anytime I'd be angry or upset, like, what they would do is be like, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Or calm down, calm down, calm down, calm down. There wasn't a place for anger, for upset. And there were times when I was a kid when I would go nuclear and I would be in like a tantrum and rage. And the punishment was fucking, without getting into specifics, let's just call it traditional, right? Like old school punishment.
You got spanked, didn't you?
That and other things, right? And so from a very early age, bar soap, in the mouth, all that good stuff. from a very early age, I was taught that anger was not cool. So anytime I felt that tantrum thing come up, I would immediately suppress it. And I became really good at that. And that served me very well over the course of my life, especially in the corporate environment, high stress situations. I was able to feel the feeling for a brief moment and then suppress it, have that poker face so I could navigate whatever was in front of me. And I got really good feedback about how collaborative I was. But over time, I found that I was being stepped on. Over time, I felt fucking exhausted from holding all that fucking emotion and not knowing what I was feeling. I was numbing because I was denying. So here's a story about how I learned, or one of the ways that I, for the first time in my life, really channeled a powerful expression of my anger. I was going to a retreat that was for men, and the retreat was taking place 2 hours north of New York City. And so as a coordinated effort to go to the retreat, the organizer said, find 4 other guys to drive up from New York City to come to this retreat. It's a part of the experience, is getting to know the men that you're coming with before you show up. And by the way, arrive between 6 and 6:30 p.m. on Friday afternoon. And that was it. And so I remember seeing that 6 and 6:30 p.m. arrival time is kind of wow, my antenna went up. I was like, that's kind of a tight time frame, but whatever. So I found 4 guys and I said, guys, it's Friday afternoon. It takes 2 hours to get up there, no traffic. I believe we need to leave at least 3 hours before. So let's meet at 3 p.m. at this hotel in New York City. And the guys were like, great. One of the guys was volunteering to drive. Cool. So I show up at 2:45. That's how I roll. By 3 p.m., only 3 of the 5 guys had arrived. And I'm like, okay, give some other guys 5 minutes, whatever. The driver shows up at 3:30. And then the 5th and final guy, his name is Ian. He strolls in at 4 p.m., an hour late, barely apologetic. So we hit the road. Of course, there's traffic. Of course, the driver didn't fill up his gas tank, so we got to stop and fill up the tank. It's all this shit. We arrive at 7:15, 45 minutes after the window, after the back end of the window. And the guy who met us at the entryway, he's like, hello, gentlemen. You do realize that you were supposed to be here between 6 and 6:30? We said, yeah, we hit traffic. Sorry. And he's like, okay, make your way in. Park the car. We make our way in. We're greeted by a couple of the organizers. They walk us to a shed, the 5 of us to a shed. They open the door. They tell us to be quiet. As we open the door, there are 50 men sitting in the shed on the ground, blindfolded in the dark. And the organizers make us look at them for a minute. We don't know what the fuck's going on. And the organizer said, these men are on the floor. They were the ones who were on time, and they're here waiting for you. And my heart sank. I was like, fuck. They gave us blindfolds. They sat us down. We had to sit there for 15 minutes to feel part of that. And then eventually we all got brought into the main room, unblindfolded. And part of me was like, thank God we weren't outed, right, for the rest of the group, because they were sitting on this ground. And so the leader of this retreat stands up. And one of the first things he does is he says, I'd like the 5 gentlemen in the room who arrived late to stand up. And as soon as he said that, I felt this wave of humiliation and rage take over my body, because now I'm stepping up and being outed in front of the entire room, being lumped into this category of someone who was late, even when I was on time. And now I'm bearing the brunt of this. So the leader points to one of the men in the group. He actually points to the guy who was the guy who rolled in at 4 p.m., Ian. And he goes, why were you late? And Ian goes, oh, we hit traffic. It was supposed to take 2 hours. It was 3 hours. We're sorry, whatever. And the leader goes, who in here trusts this man? No one's hand raised. He's like, sit down. He points to the second man in our group. He goes, why were you late? And it was the driver. And he goes, well, it's just what Ian said. We drove up here. We hit traffic. It's New York City, blah, blah, blah. Who in here trusts this man? No one's hand went up. Sit down. And then the leader points at me, and I'm stewing in my anger at this moment, but I figured out what was going on. And he goes, "Why were you late?" And I said, "I didn't do everything within my power to make sure that we were here on time. I'm sorry." He goes, "Who in here trusts this man?" And everyone raised their hands. And he said, "Thank you." Now, I was still furious at having to take responsibility for these other guys who didn't show up. There was definitely a big part of me that realized that there was more I could have done to make sure the guys understood the gravity of getting there on time. But in my head, I was murdering Ian, right? Like in my mind, I was like, Ian is that motherfucker who put me in this situation. And the way that I would have dealt with that.
Really quick on this, like, did you, when you stated that out loud, like you didn't out the other guys,
right?
You didn't say, like, hey, these guys they're late and I'm pissed off at them. So like part of me is like, well, did you really express your anger or did you lie even?
Yeah. So at that, and in that moment, I didn't express the anger the way I would have wanted to, because in that moment, I didn't know how to. I was tipping over into rage, but I also knew if I expressed my anger at those guys, it would become a blame game. And what the 50 men in the room who were sitting, who had just previously sat with their eyes blindfolded in a dusty, dark cabin, they didn't give a shit who was at fault or not. They just wanted someone to take responsibility for that shit, right?
So it sounds like you were taking responsibility not for them being late, but for anything that you could have done in the world to make sure everybody was there on time. You could have gone and picked them up individually. You could have rewarded them if they got there on time. There's a thousand things you could have done. That's what you were taking responsibility for?
Yeah, I was taking responsibility for the fact that, and this is really interesting, Brian, I'm now recalling this. I knew on some level that 6 to 6:30 window, my antenna went up. I knew that there was some sort of game that was being played there. Like, can you get there on time? But I didn't want to be this anal retentive, over-engineered asshole that like went around to each guy and said, and said, we need to be here on this time. Because I thought that I would have been looked at like the killjoy, the buzzkill.
Yeah, you would have been that guy.
That guy. And I didn't want to be that guy, even though, so I suppressed the part of me that knew better. Now, my initial reaction, the way that I would have handled that situation for 35 years of my life up to that point, was I would have just killed Ian in my head. Right? Like I would have just been like, that guy's an asshole. I'm never going to talk to him. There's plenty of other people around that I don't need to see him for the next 3 days.
Oh, I can feel that right now. And me, if I was in that situation, I would just avoided him altogether.
That's exactly what I wanted to do. But I had just recently gotten this training around how to channel anger. And so I said, so I needed a full 24 hours, man. I needed a full 24 hours to actually like let the rage pass through. And then to really hone in on what would be a powerful expression of that. So the next day, I went up to Ian. I said, Ian, I need to talk to you privately. And he goes, yeah. I go, dude, I am fucking furious at you for putting me through that situation where I was lumped into the group of men that 50 other guys hate and do not trust because you decided that you just wanted to hang out with one of your friends for a little bit longer and showed up an hour late. And if you had followed through on your commitment, like you said, then none of this would have happened. You doing that shows that you don't give a shit about my time and you were only concerned about yourself, and the ramifications of my life make me feel like shit. And I've been stewing on this for 24 hours, all because of a decision you made. And I want you to know your impact, your behavior, like the impact it had on my life. And that felt extraordinary because I didn't hold anything back. I also wasn't unhinged. I looked him dead in the eye and I was even though I felt like the energy coursing through my veins. And he looked back at me and he goes, dude, I am so fucking sorry. I don't know why I didn't see that. I don't know why I haven't apologized for it, but I'm horrified. Please accept my apologies and I'm going to make it up to you. And I'm also going to go to every single guy in our group proactively and apologize to them as well. What ended up happening, Brian, after that was that conversation led to one of the most life-changing experiences that I've ever had. Ian, as it turns out, was the treasurer of a large technology company. I don't want to name it because I don't want to out him, that everyone knows, Fortune 500 company. And he was on the 11th month of a 12-month sabbatical from that company. And he came to learn that I was in the process of wanting to leave my corporate career and start my own business. He was the one who told me, Dominic, if you're going to leave your career, you need to go and do a sabbatical before you start your next business. Like, go travel the world, go play, go have an adventure. Like, you probably have only taken 2 weeks off at the most since you've started working. Like, take this interlude and explore the world. Because of Ian, I ended up doing a 90-day radical sabbatical, saw the world, Thailand, Bali, Hawaii, New Zealand, Australia. I experienced shit on that journey that are like end of life memories. Some of the hikes I took, the 10-day silent meditation, some of the relationships I built. And if I hadn't expressed my anger in that powerful way with Ian, and it would have done it the way I normally would have, just killed him and avoided him in my mind, then I would have missed out on one of the seminal moments of my life. So it was almost like the universe patting me on the back and saying, you did the right thing. Well done. This is how you deal with anger in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that story, Dom. And I've seen you play that exact same thing with me. Now, traditionally, Brian is less on time than, let's say, Dominic. Big trigger for Dominic. And I'm going to tell this story very quickly because it's largely the same thing that you said, but there's a different twist at the end. You and I had an event, a small group of guys. I wasn't late to the event, but I wasn't on time to prepare for it, to talk to the crowd, to do all the preparation that was required, that should be done. I got there late. We got to the front of the room. We didn't talk all that much. We got done with the event. I left. And at that point, I had essentially said, well, it was a success, and I brushed it under the rug. Next day, you and I get together to get a workout in. And you came to me with the same kind of energy that you came to with Ian. And you said, man, I'm pissed. Like, I want to be able to trust you to be there on time to get this stuff done. And what that brought up in me, and kind of the twist at the end of the story, was one, I saw a new boundary. I saw an expectation that had to be met that couldn't be swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And two, it called me to a higher place. So your anger in a directed, channeled way called me to a higher place. Yes. So it started to restore trust, at least the beginning of it, and it called me to a higher place. So because this is an expectation that is higher than what I expected of myself, and I wanted to stay in integrity. I wanted to be trusted. And so now I've got a new rule for myself. Yes. And I wonder if we talk to Ian, like what his side of this conversation or of that interaction was like.
Yeah. I'd be interested too. But to the story you just told, man, I appreciate you bringing that up. Since we had that conversation, you've been on time. Right. Not just on time, but like early. It's like, okay, you'll show up and get the setup done so that when it's go time, when it's 8 a.m., it's like you're ready to go and we're recording. And that matters to me, right?
And I know it matters to you, but it also matters to me because it's not just with you that I'm on time. And I'm not always on time. It's the work in progress here. But I'm a hell of a lot better than I was. And I feel it when I'm not. Before, I wouldn't have felt it as much when I'm late. Like, whatever, I'm 5 minutes late. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
But now I can feel it, even if I have all the excuses in the world.
Yeah. This we could have a whole conversation about the on-time thing. I have a client of mine who runs a team who he was the last person to arrive all the time. And he was always like a minute late and his team would be waiting for him. He felt the same way that you did, which is, it's no big deal. But I got a chance to know his team and there was a problem, but like they didn't know how to express it. So they were sitting on this anger. It was like this stuck energy that was standing in the way of them starting the meeting on time, from them feeling like they could trust their leader, from them having the kind of energy that they would want to start the meeting with. Cause they're like, well, I'm not going to get into go mode because it's 8 a.m. and he's not going to be here for, 10 minutes. And so there's like a dissipation of energy. That's one of the biggest parts of this, Brian. If this anger conversation is resonating with you and you're like, okay, maybe I am denying my anger. Maybe I am suppressing my anger, but how do I really know when I'm doing that? There's 3 ways that I look at myself to ask that same question. The first one is inspect your energy. Really tune into your energy. So for example, when I feel angry, my initial instinct is like, I could feel my blood boiling. I could feel it and I can feel my mind racing. It's just like, boom, thoughts, injustices, the vengeance that I want. And then as soon as that runs its course, what I end up finding is like my defense mechanism kicks in that like starts to placate. It's almost like DEFCON. It just kind of shuts down. And what happens to my energy in that situation is I start to get tired. I get lethargic because it takes a ton of energy for me to put a blanket over this smoldering fire. And then the rest of the day, I'm just sitting there. I'm like, ugh.
Okay. So you're saying it's something to look at. If I'm going throughout my day, I'm like, man, like, why is my energy just down right now?
Yes.
It's something to at least look at and say, well, what do you say to yourself?
What is it about? Like, why am I feeling sluggish? Why am I feeling lethargic? And it's usually because if I trace it back, there was something that happened that I didn't fully feel, that I didn't fully express, that I just, like, I ate a shit sandwich and I have not shat it out yet.
Gross.
And
Gross.
that is a real key trigger, is check your energy. Check your energy. And one of the things that I saw a lot with being,
and just so I'm clear, Dom, on like check your energy, you're talking about energy in the sense of like, do I feel energetic right now? Do I feel like my most alive self?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, so there's a number of dimensions you can check. Does your energy feel clean right now? Like, do you feel aligned? You know what I mean? Clean, like
clean energies.
Clean's just like
a whole other podcast.
Clean's like, I'm open. I'm good. I feel energized. I feel optimistic. I feel positive. I feel like, yeah, bring a challenge on. Does my energy feel erratic? Does it feel like I'm being pulled in a million different directions? Does it feel frenetic? That also is, for me, oftentimes a trigger or a signal that I'm angry. But the biggest one for me, when I know that there's like real anger that needs to be dealt with, is when I'm feeling sluggish and lethargic, because it takes an extraordinary amount of my unconscious conditioning to shut down my feeling, to suppress my feeling. And that's when I'm walking around feeling like heavy, cloudy.
And I don't think you're stating that this is the only reason you might be feeling that way. It could be that you didn't go to bed on time. It could be a million other things, but it's at least a checkpoint.
Correct.
Okay.
That's one checkpoint. There's two others. Another one would be inspecting your language. Here's a great example. One of my clients, and he and I are openly working about his anger, so I have permission to share this story. I've known he's angry for quite some time, but his anger is in that third category where he directs it inward, right? Like, it doesn't come out sideways. It doesn't come out directly. It's the analogy I give him is, you know, some people, when they get angry, they throw a grenade outwards and like detonate everything around them. I'm like, you jump off the grenade, and it detonates inwards, and his energy like gets sapped as a result of it. But his language, it's fascinating. Like, he'll tell me a story where his boundary has clearly been crossed, whether it's from his mom or from his relationship. And what he'll say is, like, you'll see a little bit of the anger come out. He'll be like, yeah, my mom didn't fucking pick up the kids like she said she was going to, and my kids were crying because like grandma didn't come. And he's like, it's fucking not cool, but it's all good. And that thing at the end, it's all good. Like, and he does this in so many areas. It's the qualifier, right? It's all good. It's okay. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. That language is a defense mechanism, because the pain and the anger is so potent that, and he doesn't necessarily know how to deal with it, that his way of soothing over that, the way of short circuiting it until it gets into so that it doesn't get into that place of tilt, is him saying, it's all good. I've caught him on him like, but dude, is it?
This is such a good one. I feel like very guilty on this one. I used to work at a client site, and I would listen for that exact phrase. It's all good. Because I knew that meant things were a real shitstorm.
Nice. You're right. Yes.
As soon as that comes out in that way, now that was in a business setting, but I can hear myself right now using all these qualifiers. And what the qualifier does for me is it soothes. It means that I don't really have to take action on this because it's not that big of a deal. And that's the tool I use unconsciously to suppress that anger.
Bingo.
To say it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, I'm angry, but this thing happened, but it's not that big of a deal. There's people starving in other countries and yada, yada, yada.
That rationalization pattern, right? And it's like, or I should be grateful, or I shouldn't be this upset about it. I shouldn't, because there's some sort of, and those are key triggers for you. Now, oftentimes it's really hard for you to catch yourself. So look out for this in other people, right? Look out for this first in other people and see where they start to qualify. And then when they do that, just like you did with your clients, kind of poke on it, be like, but is it really all good? You know what I mean? Just kind of like, is it? Because that sounds pretty fucked up. And then that person, see how they respond to it. It'll call more attention to when you do it. The last category is inspect your boundaries. So the first one was inspect your language. Second was inspect your energy. The third one is inspect your boundaries. Now, what I mean by that is if you're clear on what's cool, what's not, then if your boundary has been trampled, like there's a righteous anger that comes up. For the example that you just gave about, we had that event, you came skidding in right at the time that we were supposed to start, and you were the guy leading the meditation to start. And as it was like 6:59 and you weren't there, I was like, fuck, am I going to have to be the one who goes up on stage and does this thing? I felt my boundary was clearly crossed. Boundary of trust. I want to know that my guy who I'm in this with is going to show up and do his thing, and I'm not going to have to worry about that unless there's some extenuating circumstance, like the train shut down or something, in which case you would have communicated that to me and we would have been all good, but that wasn't the case. So my boundary, I was like, okay, this is clearly crossed. I feel justified in my upset, and I'm going to let this sit until I can figure out how to appropriately communicate it without watering it down. So inspect your boundaries.
I feel like in my life, I'm not sure, like, do you have a set of 12 boundaries that you live by? Like how are they set?
Did I say 12 commandments? Like the 12 steps. The 10 commandments. It goes to show you I'm not a very good Catholic anymore. No, I do not have a list of boundaries, but it's interesting you bring that up. When I feel that anger, it actually helps me to actually get clear on what my boundaries are and what they aren't. If I feel anger, it's like, what am I angry about? I'm angry about the fact that Brian put me in this position where I didn't know if I was going to have to be the one who stepped up. And I'm already juggling a lot with this evening and hosting people as they're coming in, and it's at my apartment. And I was like, okay, like the thing that Brian was supposed to own, I'm feeling like he's not delivering on. So I was like, okay, so my boundary here is if we're in this together, you and me, and I'm going to show up and do the thing that I said I was going to do, my boundaries crossed when you don't show up doing the thing that you said you were going to do with the fullest of integrity. And that actually helped me to realize and crystallize what my boundary was. It's oftentimes quite rare that there's like a written, very clearly defined boundary that I know. It's usually the situation that causes an emotional reaction that allows me to help.
Yeah. What I was thinking is a boundary synonymous with triggered? And it sounds like actually, no, the trigger happens first. And then we have to identify, we have to reflect on, well, what is that trigger? What is that anger coming from?
Yeah, correct.
Which makes sense. There's an exercise that I run. I've done this with relationships. I've done this in business. And it's usually when we're going to have some sort of important conversation. To give you an example, I was planning a vacation. And the quick exercise, I'll describe it, that I go through, and this was, I was talking with a partner, a romantic partner of mine. We talk about what the topic is. The topic is we're going to go on vacation. And then we go through 4 steps. The first step is, what are your intention? What's your intention with this vacation? Some people will intend to relax. Some people intend to go on vacation for adventure, to eat food. There's a lot of different intentions, even though you're on the same vacation. The second thing is, what are your dreams? What is the best outcome that could happen? The third is, what are some of your fears associated with this conversation? And the fourth one, that is always the last one that I bring up, is like, what boundaries do you have?
Yeah.
And for a vacation, it might be like, well, I have to be back to work on a certain day. So that's a boundary. I can't go past that day. I want to make sure I get some sleep. I want to get 8 hours of sleep because I'm on vacation. So that's a boundary. And what I find when I do this exercise, almost every single time, is that when we get to the boundaries, people go, I don't think I really have any boundaries.
Which is bullshit.
Which is bullshit, but they're really hard to identify. They're hard to like to call out, to write down, to articulate, until through that conversation, they're crossed. And so what I find is in those conversations, we have to take notes on, wait, that's a boundary. Oh, I don't feel good. And so identifying, so this boundary conversation that you're having is a really important one, but for me, if you just said, write down your boundaries or tell me what they are, like, oh my gosh, I don't even know until they're crossed. And then I can create it.
Yeah, you're hitting on an important thing here. It's really let the emotion of anger help you to define your boundaries. That's one of the other superpowers of really allowing this emotion of anger. I remember as I started putting out more and more content and establishing myself as a thought leader in the space that you and I are in right now, people started reaching out to me more and more often and saying, hey, Dominic, can I schedule time with you to pick your brain, pick your brain, and pick your brain, and pick your brain? And I remember getting fucking angry at that. And I was like, why am I getting angry at this? Like, here are people who resonate with what I'm doing. And it's obviously a sign of respect that they want to spend time with me. And I was like, what is this fucking anger? And I allowed myself to feel it. And what I ended up recognizing was the anger came from a place of when they were reaching out to me, were only concerned with themselves, like what they could get out of that interaction with me. And many times it was people who I didn't have a relationship with. There was no offer or reciprocity in any way, shape, or form. It was just like, can I pick your brain? If you literally envision what that is, it's like taking parts of my brain and then going and chewing on it with nothing back in return. I was like, So a boundary for me that started to feel really healthy was saying, awesome. Like, I'm honored that you feel that you really connect with my message. And I'm curious, are you interested in exploring a client relationship? I'm wondering what you think I might be able to get out of something like this. What are you offering me? What's a gift of yours that you can share with me as a form of reciprocity? And that felt better for me than just stewing in the anger or begrudgingly going to those meetings out of obligation.
You just took this to the next level, because not only did you were triggered, you were angry, you reflected on it, you realized what the boundary is, and then you created a rule. Yeah. And once that rule is created for you, you can automate it. Yeah. And now you're starting to create these scenarios that are going to keep coming to you. You run the rule that was created by the boundary, that was created by the trigger, that was created by the anger. And all of a sudden, life becomes faster. And we wonder why our energy goes up when we allow ourselves to feel anger.
Bingo. I think the last category that I really want to hit here, man, about anger is with respect to anger and the women in our lives. Because anger, when it's not dealt with, and when it comes out in the context of, let's say, our romantic relationships or with our sisters or our mothers, whatever it is, anger can have some really catastrophic consequences. Women bear the extraordinary brunt of men's anger, especially when it's undealt with, especially when it's rage, especially when it's unharnessed. And what you and I are talking about is really starting to embrace and harness anger in a way where it can be channeled effectively. A quick story from my life when anger just did not look sexy on me. I was 25 years old. I was dating my great friend right now. Her name is Grace Gold. So this was 15 years ago. I was living in Hoboken, New Jersey, like a lot of New Jersey kids do. This is, if you don't know Hoboken, it's right outside of New York City. And one of the things that she loved to do during the summer was go down to the Jersey Shore. So in the summer, I think it was 4th of July weekend, to go down to the Jersey Shore, I fucking hated it. Traffic, misery. It took 3 hours. She loved it. I had no patience back then. So of course, traffic all the way down. And she liked to do that a day trip, right? Pick me up early on a Saturday morning as a 25-year-old. That wasn't working for me. So I was hungover. We'd drive down, and then we'd have to drive 3 hours back because of traffic. Now, on this particular day, I was hungry. We were driving back. I was hungry. Her air conditioning in the car fucking broke. So it was sweltering outside, humid. I had my shirt off because it was that bad. And I was just a miserable son of a bitch. We get up to Hoboken, and there's this area where you have to, it's the intersection where you cross over the Holland Tunnel entrance. Her car rolls up to the stop, and it goes put, put, put. The car just fucking dies. She's not out of gas. The car just dies. And she tries to turn the ignition. It's just it's not moving. It's not working. And she's panicking. And so I was like, okay, get out of the car. So here we are at a stoplight. There's a bunch of traffic behind us. I'm in my bathing suit. I'm shirtless. And so we do this, what do you call that? Chinese fire drill. So she gets out, walks in front of the car. I walk in front of the car. I get now. And it's before I sit down, I see the car behind me is this BMW. And there's this dude with slicked back black hair. And he just looks like an asshole to me, maybe because I'm pissed off. So I make eyes with this guy, and then I get in the car. I sit down. I try and turn the ignition. It goes click, click, click. Nothing's working, and I'm on tilt. The light turns green. I can't move, and this dickhead behind me lays on the horn. Right, the guy in the Beamer. He's laying on the horn, and I stick my arm out the window, and I'm like waving him by, and he's not going. He's just laying on the horn, and I lose my shit. I swing the door open, and I start marching to his car. I'm like, you motherfucker, get the fuck out of the car. And before it can escalate, a New Jersey police trooper walks across the street, and these are his words. He goes, surfer dude, calm down, man. Because here I am in like my light blue shorts, shirtless. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, this asshole keeps beeping us. Our car's dead. Cop diffused the situation, thank God. When I got back into the car, Grace wouldn't speak to me. And for the next few days, she wouldn't talk to me. And what came up from that later on was, she was like, Dominic, I was afraid of you. You lost your shit, and that did not make me feel safe. I was terrified of you, and maybe that anger could turn on me in that way someday. And that gave me this big wake-up call about, holy shit, like I need to get this under control. So one of the things that you and I did as a part of the process here leading up to this podcast was we polled some women in this online forum called the Kaleidoscope, which we've talked about before. It's a place for really exploring like your sexual behaviors, your fantasies in a very safe environment and getting feedback on things. And I asked the women of that community a question. I was like, when is anger sexy and when is anger unsexy? And there was a woman, Emily, who said, I don't think anger is ever sexy. I lived for 8 years with a man who was angry all the time. And before that, I grew up with a stepfather who was angry all the time. I'm all for someone who is determined and powerful and stands up for what's right, but anger, no thanks. And what Emily's talking about is 100% of her exposure to anger is the shadow anger.
The rage.
The rage.
The same thing you felt in New Jersey.
That's exactly it, right? And so that's fucking unattractive, but it's also unsafe, and there's no place for it. Lindsay said, anger that is meant to hurt or be destructive is not sexy. Being angry and letting that feeling bleed on everyone around you and being out of control, not sexy, right? And that's what happened to me. In that moment, I was tipped over and it was bleeding on everyone. I was bleeding on Grace and the guy who I wanted to knock out, and I was out of control. Not sexy. Now let's turn that. Some of the women who said it was sexy, this is Leah P. I stand behind the healthy expression of righteous anger. Sometimes people do shitty things for shitty reasons, and I believe that we have the right to act as teachers to each for the lessons of showing up in the community of humanity. The healthy expression of it is the key. Without physical force, unless life is at stake. And this kind of goes back to your point about like, when's it okay to punch, right? Like without physical force, unless life is at stake. But with a directness that sends an unmistakable message that the behavior or action is unacceptable. It's especially sexy when the anger and the expression of it is in service to others.
Leah is so articulate.
She's awesome.
She's great.
She's read her own poems at our Discerning Dick events. She's very introspective. Here's one more, Brian. I don't think I have the person's name, but anger can be very sexy. It gets a bum rap and labeled as a negative emotion, but I posit that it is an amazingly generative and creative and passionate emotion when felt, allowed, safely experienced, and consciously expressed. For my man, and for men in general, the ferocity and passion of anger can be so very sexy and direct and decisive and powerful. It simply means a boundary has been crossed and that it is unacceptable. How you choose to express it depends on your level of inner work, resilience, awareness, and willingness to feel.
Dominic, something I'm gathering from this is that anger, maybe unlike any other emotion, has the ability to create trust, as she just described. It also has the very powerful ability to destroy trust and destroy trust for a very long time.
Right on. And it's all about, and you heard the words here, how you choose to experience it and express it.
So what are the suggestions, Dom, then? I mean, whether it's rage or anger, we feel that range. What do we do, right? When we're feeling rage, do we suppress it? Do we go and beat up a pillow? Do we just sit on it? Like, what do we do?
Yeah. My 3 steps for it, Brian, is number 1, I feel it. Number 2, I express it. And number 3, then I harness it. So number 1, feeling it. It's allowing that feeling to fully come in. Now, for example, if I'm in a situation where in that moment, it's not cool to fully feel it. Let's say I'm doing a speech or something like that, or I'm with my partner, to fully feel it in that space. If it's going to lead me to going to seeing red and losing my control, then maybe I need to put a pause in that and fully feel it later when I'm in a safer environment. And that's the same thing for the expression of it. In our men's group, we do this in a number of ways. Like, we will let out a fucking primal scream.
Are you saying there's a time element to this? Like, okay, just because we're triggered and we're starting to feel the rage doesn't mean we have to fully process it in the moment?
Correct. Because sometimes it may be unsafe for yourself or for the other. I've gotten better at being able to feel more of my anger in a given moment because my threshold, my capacity has increased. So I can feel more of it without losing control, which actually allows me to more swiftly deal with it. You said before, right? Like, life becomes faster, but also more energizing as a result. But when I was doing this at first, like I told you the story with Ian at the men's retreat, it took me a full 24 hours to be able to process it. And actually a few failed attempts to walk up to him where I chickened out because I was like, you know what? If I confront this now, I may end up wanting to beat the shit out of him. Or I may say something that would make me look stupid, or I may say something that I don't mean. So it took me some time. So for you, if you're starting to fully tap into your feelings and emotions around this at first, it may not be right there in the moment.
Okay.
But you need to give it space later. So the feeling it and the expression of it may need to happen when you're in a safer environment. For me, sometimes I'm in my shower, primal scream, or grab a pillow on my couch and scream into it to muffle it so I don't terrify my neighbors.
You do so much weird shit in your place between your bedroom and your showers and your cold showers and your pillows. Goodness.
You don't even know that.
This is folks, this is how we deal with anger.
Yeah. You don't even know the half of it, bro. Punching shit. You know what I mean? Like, on my couch, stuff that won't break. Like, I'll punch until I'm fucking exhausted. One of the exercises that I did at John Wineland's group was a full expression of anger. They helped to process through that. 2 women were my partners, and they were holding the space for me to allow that anger to come out. And they wanted to see all of it. And a big part of it was like just getting on the floor and wailing on these pillows, screaming. And I just let it all out in this channeled, harnessed way. And when it was done, they both expressed arousal. They were like, fuck.
It was a turn on.
Turn on. They were like, that was so hot. Because it wasn't directed at them. There was like this powerful contained expression of it. That anger was a direct line to my killer instinct. And they're like, if this guy knows how to harness his anger in that way, he can protect me. I can feel safe. There's that safety element to it. But if I'm a tornado and I'm breaking shit without consequence, without consciousness, that's where the feelings of fear can go.
The unhinged, right? The this guy could do anything and I could be in the path of it.
And the third step is really to harness that emotion, right? So I've felt it fully. I've expressed it in a conscientious way. And now it's time to harness this where either I can direct it at the source and, let's say, right or wrong to establish a boundary, or I can harness it to fucking create. You know, I could harness it to do a podcast, right? Like, I can harness it to write a blog post. I can harness it for...
Dominic, when you say harness it, what does that mean?
Energy. This energy of anger is now inside of my body. And now it's like this fuel. It's a motivation, right? Like, we've all felt anger. Like, a lot of people go to the gym to work out their anger. But I would posit that you're actually not necessarily fully working out your anger. You're just putting that energy somewhere. You're not actually getting to the source of or dealing with or reinforcing a boundary. But once I've already done all that, like once I've established my boundary, once I've come to terms with like what caused that, and I feel good about how I've handled that anger, the energy is still there. Cool. Let me use this for good.
I want to set the scene for something that happens quite often in our men's group. And that is somebody's feeling something. I'm using myself here as the example, feeling something. not quite sure like what it is. I'm stuck. I can't ideate on it. I feel full in a not good way. I feel frantic. And somebody will often say, well, would it be helpful to get that out? I'll say, I think it is. Yes. And I do what I don't think a lot of people do, because I know I didn't before we started this group. And we'll get either Rockwell, right, that big gymnastics sort of thing, or a bunch of pillows, and we'll just go to town on it, hit it, boom, boom, right, left, and to a point of exhaustion. And what I've felt in the few times that I've done this, at the end of it, wasn't just exhaustion, but it was clarity. It was like that fullness, and not in a good way. I'm trying to think of the right words here, but this blockage almost is released. And so, Dominic, when you say release the energy, it's a very physical feeling. Yeah. It's not just some esoteric terminology, but there is a release. And on the other side of that, of letting that anger go, there's usually a lot of clarity.
Yes.
And it's a feeling of freedom. It's a feeling of bliss almost.
It's big.
And so I want to make sure that this isn't just some sort of like esoteric mental exercise, because usually it's not. Usually anger has a lot more power behind it.
There's a ton of power, and you nailed it. There's clarity behind it. The only way to get to that clarity, though, is to give it space to feel it and to give an expression of it. And sometimes the expression is a physical expression, the beating on something, the screaming on something. To do it in a conscious way where there's not like a hole in your fucking wall or dishes broken or someone else is scared because of it. And when that starts to happen, you have more power, you have more energy, you have more clarity. And the women in your world, as we've just read about this, we've heard it and I've experienced in my life, get really fucking turned on by it, man. Because that killer instinct, like, it immediately comes back to this man stands for something in this world. This man has boundaries. This man knows how to harness his emotions. He's actually tuned into his emotions. This man can protect me, can protect our kids. And one of the things that the women in John Wineland's group would talk about, and he's, again, my coach in masculinity and spiritual intimacy, a lot of your fuck can be found in anger. The part of you that's just like the fuck, like the sexual magnetism, the animalism that many women, not all women, but many women crave in a sexual setting, can be found in the powerful harnessing of your anger. I thought that the way that we can wrap this up is one of the quotes that we haven't gotten to, and I think it puts an exclamation point on exactly what we've been talking about. There's this philosopher by the name of Aristotle. Have you heard of him?
Oh yeah, that guy.
Anybody can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power, and that is not easy. What I would say to amend that is I don't necessarily agree that it's not within everyone's power. I would say it's not within everyone's power right now, because just like every other emotion, anger requires training. Training to understand it, training to allow it, training to get at it, training to unwind whatever societal labels have been put on it. It's not okay. Whatever parental teachings you've learned, whatever experiences you've had with expressing anger in the past, which may have been destructive. If we can learn it and give space for it, have conversations like these around it, I truly believe that anger, especially in men, the way that we've been talking, can be quite a healing force, a protective force, and a powerful force.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.